Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the Pulse podcast by Uplift Dawah. I am your host, Brother Yusuf Rasami, and we have an amazing show for you today. Let's get started. Bismillah. Allahu Akbar. Today, we have an amazing host with us today, Brother Sharif Abu Layth. Welcome to the podcast.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to yourself and to all the listeners as well, inshallah.
MashaAllah. We have an amazing topic today. Does science lead to atheism? And we will get to other areas as well. There's a lot of things that I do want to cover today, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. But for those who don't know you, I follow your work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you in all of the things that you do. But for those who don't know you, can you introduce yourself to them a little bit?
It's a really hard thing, when somebody asks you to introduce themselves.
Always.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm from Manchester, United Kingdom, and maybe perhaps some of you that might know me or seen me know that I have done debates on various subjects with non-Muslims, mainly on atheism and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on is the Quran the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on liberalism. I've done a debate with a liberal secular on is liberalism failing, as well as topics and discussions around Islamic economics versus capitalism. So I've done a number of things, alhamdulillah, and it's a bit of a, I don't know if I don't like to talk about it in terms of this way, but it is a bit of a point, which is I was sort of the first one in sort of the recent era. I'm talking about last 16, 17 years to start doing debates with atheists. So there is a YouTube very long time ago from 2004 now. Where alhamdulillah, where I did a debate with an atheist, and that was actually the first one. And then alhamdulillah, from that, many brothers actually contacted me from that debate, and then through the sort of discussions and talking to them, they started to do debates on these types of topics as well. So alhamdulillah, there was lots of brothers that started to do and discuss these issues and done far better than me as well as a result, taking the discussions far better, inshallah.
MashaAllah, that's very humble of you. And you've really opened the door when many were not even thinking about these type of topics. And so that's exactly what I wanted to ask you next is, given the fact that you were the pioneer for Muslims when other Muslims were not debating, you were the pioneer who started to debate atheists. What was it like in a time like that where many people were not doing these type of debates, many Muslims were not doing these type of debates with atheists, and here you are in front of 300 people debating atheists. What was it like?
So it was obviously it was an interesting experience, alhamdulillah, and I've done many, alhamdulillah, since then as well. But at that time, you're right. None of I think there may have been one or two Muslims. It was very small debates that took place maybe a few years earlier, but it wasn't well known. But when I started doing the debates, obviously, like I said, there was I couldn't go onto YouTube and look at a Muslim brother who debated belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't even think William Lane Craig was on YouTube at the time as well. Obviously YouTube. That was sort of the 2004 was sort of the beginning era, or early 2000s was the beginning era of YouTube. So it wasn't that much out there in terms of looking at references. So it was, it was an interesting thing. And the key thing was, would we be able to articulate belief in the evidences for the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you've got somebody who's an atheist trying to argue against it? Or would we confuse the audience? That's the worst thing, isn't it? That you've got a Muslim and non-Muslim audience, and they come out, siding with the atheists, na'udhu billah, yeah? So there was concerns regards to this. And so, I had been doing lots of talks and circles anyway on this particular topic. And obviously that's helped me greatly, inshallah, to do the actual debate. And so then I got invited for it, and I discussed with the organizers at the time, which was Muslims, alhamdulillah. And I said, look, is it going to be wise to do this? Because, like I said, the worst thing to do is to confuse the audience. But I think we discussed it, and we said, you know what, it'd be a good opportunity to get a message out there. And certainly because of the environment also at that time, which was post 9/11. So I don't know if you want to talk about that type of environment as well.
Yeah, definitely. What can you take me back to what made you that defining moment that made you say, I am going to get into this and I am going to take on this subject and actually debate as a way to defend my beautiful faith, Islam. Can you take us back to that defining moment when you decided on that, you made that choice?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, since I was very young, I was going to Islamic circles, Islamic talks, in the UK. And so, I'm talking about when I was about 10, 11 years of age and onwards. And so even when I was at school, I used to actually debate with the fellow students, talk to them about Islam, 12, 13-year-olds. I invited Muslims to come to lead what we call religious studies or religious education at the time it was called in my high school, as you Americans would call it, or we call it secondary school. So I used to, try and engage and present Islam out there, even at a young age. And, obviously you make lots of mistakes and you learn things. And I also used to like to discuss with, some of the teachers as well, in regards to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it was in my biology classes at school or later on at college. Or I used to sort of engage in a back and forth with my biology teacher because he was quite a staunch atheist. So I sort of had that, engagement with people where, I was constantly debating and discussing. And then when I went to university, I started to get more involved in the da'wah, as many people do when they go to universities. And so I realized that there was something missing in regards to the, when people argue belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and argue for the evidences. So I noticed that there were certain arguments that you were not really being presented in, the strong, robust way. It wasn't the case that there wasn't the arguments there. Obviously, there was the arguments there. There were certain Muslims who were discussing it, or certainly the classical scholars of Islam would, it was in their books. It was contained within that. But out in the public, out in the Muslim community, and there wasn't really any discussions on that. It was mainly like the types of debates that used to take place were mainly Christian and Muslim debates about, is the Bible the word of God? Or Jesus, is he a prophet of God or is he a son of God? There wasn't really this discussion about atheism per se. And so, I didn't go into there to say, right, I want to become a debater. I went in there to sort of say, look, I think it's important that the Muslims understand the arguments about belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also belief, therefore, of the Quran as the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that just pushed me out there and look at the evidences, look at the arguments, look at the counter arguments. And then obviously you would discuss with, non-Muslims. You'd also discuss with Muslims as well. And then you'd get feedback. And then from that, I started to get invited to do circles and talks. And like I said, from that, then there was a debate. And so it's sort of, there was never one defining moment. It was just sort of a general progression into engaging in this type of dawah and other aspects of the dawah as well. Sorry, Yusuf, I can't hear you. I think you're on mic.
I was muted. Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah.
In your view, looking at the environment now and how many brothers and sisters are now getting into this topic, where do you see us now and in the future? And what do you hope to see as well?
Yeah, so, I years ago, I was speaking to Hamza Sources. I'm sure you've heard of him and many of your listeners would have heard of him. So, alhamdulillah, so I mean, so we were discussing, and I remember saying to him that, look, alhamdulillah, it's really good that me and you, because at the time, me and him used to be like the ones that used to go around debating. And
MashaAllah.
he had always advised me to get my own camcorder, video recorder, because he said, don't rely upon the brothers to put it up on YouTube. They'll never do it. And I said, you know what? At least one of us is getting our videos up on YouTube. Yeah. So I was quite happy with that. Yeah. But what I said to what we were saying, or what I mentioned to him, is I said, look, we will only know of the impact of this type of dawah when we start to hear other Muslims, other than us, talk about this and take on these arguments. Yeah, that's the only way we're going to be able to understand the impact of our dawah. Because for me, these debates, and debates, by the way, is not the be all and the end all in the dawah as well. Yeah, it's only a small, very small aspect, But the primary purpose of doing these debates was really to give confidence for Muslims. That's what we wanted to do. Arm them with the arguments and the understandings, and make them understand there's nothing to fear when atheists come with their arguments, whether that's from a scientific point of view or from a philosophical point of view. There's nothing to fear, because actually when you put the debates and the discussion side by side, the arguments for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence and their arguments, then you'll see the strength of our arguments. They are intuitive, they are rational, and they're built upon, observation and evidence as well, even observation, but also rational deductive evidence. So, alhamdulillah, what happened as a result is that people started to adopt these arguments, which we now see, alhamdulillah, with lots of du'at, around the world that will talk about, rational belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some of the other arguments as well. And just to note, Yusuf, as well, when earlier on, like in the 1990s, so alhamdulillah, I might not look it, although I've got grey hair now in my beard.
You still look very young, Sheikh.
I remember in the late 1990s, early 2000s, it was considered a bid'ah, an innovation, to argue for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. Yeah, people would say you should only use the Quran and that's it, and not talk about things are limited and dependent. So there was a period that, but obviously I think a lot of du'at now, a lot of dawah going out there now talking about using these arguments and realizing that so long as you know that you can use the rational arguments to come to the conclusion that a creator exists, but not use our understanding of the reality to understand the essence of the creator, then that is okay. Yeah, so this is really important, because the discussions about the nature or the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our mind. We cannot get to that. Yeah, so we have to submit to what the Quran and the Sunnah say. But what our mind can come to the conclusion is that a creator does exist. And I give this very popular example where I say, if somebody knocks on the door, or rings the bell, your initial reaction is going to be somebody's there, somebody's knocking on the door. But you're not going to be able to comprehend whether it's a man or a woman, how tall they are, what color eyes they've got, what color hair they've got. None of that, because that's outside of our sense perception. But what we can sense is that the door is knocking, and we can therefore conclude something or someone is causing that to occur. Beyond that, I need to know who that person is. And for us, when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means it's from revelation to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
So in other sense, there's nothing wrong with using logic to come to the conclusion that there is someone knocking the door. But after that, you need revelation to describe who Allah is according to how he described himself.
That's right. Yeah.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. There are a lot of people, like Brother Anas was just saying, there are a lot of people that still believe that this is bid'ah. And that we shouldn't engage in these type of things. But alhamdulillah, like you said, there are many people that have engaged in this now, and I see a lot of young people engaging in this more. Me myself, there was a time that I would never engage in this, but alhamdulillah, that changed, and it has a lot to do with people like you who have went out there and showed other Muslims that this is easy, it can be done, and there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to arguing for the case of Allah. We have the upper hand, alhamdulillah, right? Alhamdulillah. And so that did a tremendous job. there is one thing that I'm starting to see, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and I want to know if you have actually realized it as well, and that is there are more and more Muslims coming together now. Before, it was everyone was kind of doing their own thing. Because of the quarantine, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done something really amazing. And this is one of the benefits, I guess, of the corona, is that more Muslims are now coming together and joining each other, talking about things and learning together and asking each other questions. And not only that, but coming to platform to have dialogues with Christians and atheists on their platforms. This is something different that we haven't seen before, because you have Speaker's Corner, and we see a lot of videos coming from there, good and bad. But then there's something totally different that's happening now. SC Dawah is doing a lot of amazing things. Brother Hamza, Brother Subair, and all the other brothers. You yourself, Brother Yusuf Ponders. We're now engaging with people on these platforms. What do you think of this new thing that's happening where Muslims are joining together?
Yeah, no, alhamdulillah. I think this is where technology is absolutely, unique, and it's an amazing thing, isn't it? That, you're in America and I'm here in the UK, and we can discuss, in such an instant way, and have viewers as well around the world, inshallah, watching it. So it's just it's an amazing thing. And I think obviously with like, for example, in the UK scene, I don't know what it was like in America, but in the UK scene, everything was locked down. You couldn't meet people. We couldn't even go to the mosque. Mosques have only been open for the last 2 weeks now. So so a lot of people, especially a lot of people, alhamdulillah, who are practicing, who have been engaging in da'wah, had to think creatively. How do you continue? If you want to go to a circle, how do you continue going to a circle or to a talk? Or how do you reach out to people and talk to them, and convey the da'wah and the call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? All these things. So therefore, these platforms are being created. And I think, obviously people start to then share ideas, share engagements and discussions with regards to this. And I think also there's another point, which is that because of the types of attacks, if you want to say, against Islam and the Muslims, a lot of Muslims have realized, the debate about some of these, madhahib, schools of thought, sort of the internal debates amongst the Muslims seem a lot less important now than some of the debates that are taking place outside with regards to the non-Muslims and what they're saying about the Deen of Islam. These non-Muslims don't care whether you follow a particular madhab, whether you're Shafi or Hanafi or whatever it is, or whether they call you Salafi or whatever. The point that they're criticizing certain core principles. They're criticizing, the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the belief in nature of the Quran as a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nobility of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sharia and aspects of Islamic law. Now, these are things that we all share, no matter what madhahib you're upon. This is what we all share. So I think a lot of Muslims realizing, actually, whatever group a person is from, they have to realize that the same nature of discussion is taking place. And we have to respond as a community, as an ummah, rather than just get involved in internal discussions and debates, which, maybe there is a platform for that, but, it's of lesser importance, if you want to say, because, we've got situations now where, sadly, some Muslims are leaving Islam, because of these types of criticism. So as a result, it's important that, we pull the resources of the ummah together and the Muslims together in order to help respond on these issues.
I was listening to William Lane Craig, and he said something very interesting, and I want to see if you actually agree or disagree. He says that the idea or the reason why it's important to debate is it doesn't do anything else except it gives people permission to enter the faith. Intellectually speaking.
Yeah.
That specific faith is somewhat can be defended. It is intellectually strong, and so because of that, it gives people permission to enter that faith. Is what he said. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree one hand and I sort of disagree another hand. On the one hand, I think debates, like formal debates, in my personal opinion, is not the best way to bring people to Islam. And I've been talking about how I engaged in debates at the beginning, but I don't see it as the best way. The best way to bring people to Islam is actually through personal connections with people. Engaging with a person, interacting with them, demonstrating the example of Islam, and then you can. And that doesn't mean you don't talk to them about the intellectual aspect. You do talk to them, but it's because people naturally connect when they see examples, isn't it? And when they're able to engage with a person face to face. So that is the best way. Debates, I would say, do fit within an overall frame, and that frame is primarily to demonstrate the strength of a particular idea vis-a-vis the alternative idea. Yeah. And for some people, that's important because it gives them confidence. So, alhamdulillah, I've come across Muslims who have gone to debates like, proof of God debate, where you have a Muslim, and they've not been Muslim at the time. Yeah. And from that, they said, you know what? Not in the actual debate, but maybe a couple of weeks or a few days later, I hear about one brother. He says to me, such and such came to the debate. He was so impressed with it. Alhamdulillah, he's now Muslim. Yeah. And, alhamdulillah, it's an amazing situation. But a lot of the work was not done because of the debate. A lot of the work was done prior to the debate. It was through the interaction with the brothers that this non-Muslim became Muslim. But it's like probably what you said. When he came to the debate and he saw, okay, I can now see Islam side by side by kufr, and I've now seen the strength of Islam. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yes, it is definitely correct. Yeah. So, from that perspective, it is good. And also from the perspective of giving confidence to the Muslims as well.
That's another side that many people don't really look at, that it actually breaks down doubts, gives confidence to the Muslims, and it allows them or gives them purpose in being a Muslim, or reasons for being Muslim, especially the laymen, those many people who don't really study this stuff, who don't really know anything. When they hear a lot of doubts being pushed towards them, it gives them that permission as well to remain strong Muslims, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So what I want to do now is kind of jump into the topic at hand. And that topic is, does science lead to atheism? So let me ask you, what do you think of that proposition, science leads to atheism?
I think if anybody says that, then they don't understand what science is and how science works. So if a person turns around and claims that science leads to atheism, I would ask him, what does he understand by science? That would be my first question for him.
Got it. Many of them, think that science is the only path to truth, that it can answer all of the questions of life. And perhaps maybe this is 80% of atheists, or maybe even a smaller number, but a lot of atheists simply just follow. They hear what a lot of the Dawkins and Sam Harris's of the world and what they propagate. And so they take those wholeheartedly, they take simple arguments and they run with that. And so can science give us all of the truth?
Yeah.
Lead us to truth?
Yeah, so it's a good question, obviously, what you've asked, and obviously it's a lot of questions. It's a points that they will raise. The reason why I always ask them to define science is because you need, a lot of atheists believe that they're just objective. They don't have presuppositions. They don't have concepts that are already in existence in their mind. And so what you do is when you ask them, okay, what is science? Then what you do is you get them to realize and understand that the concepts that they hold, the preconceived biases that they hold, when they understand that, then you can start to break down these preconceived biases regards to this. So when a person turns around and says science leads to atheism, I would ask that question: what is science? And then they would try to say these things, maybe like you mentioned, Yusuf, which is that, well, science can answer all questions, that science is the only mechanisms for truth, etc. And there's two paths you can go down, and although I will use both anyway, but the first path I would simply say is I would give them examples of where science cannot be used to determine an idea, but yet the idea is true. Yeah. So in a debate I did once in Australia, in fact, this is going back 5 years ago, with an atheist professor, he said this similar point, and I said, look, there are truths that you can establish which are not scientific. Yeah. And I gave the example of a painting. I said the painting of the Mona Lisa. Yeah. Famous painting, isn't it? I think it's the most expensive painting in the world. So I said, look, from science, what does science tell us about the painting? Yeah. So what is science? If you want to use it just generic way, is observation, testing, and repetition of testing and observation. Yeah. So based upon your observation and testing, what are you going to test? You're going to test the paint, you're going to test the canvas, you're going to test the material. Yeah, that's all you're going to test. So science as a field is going to tell me what it's made up of, what the colors are, what the composition of the paint is, etc. What is within its field. So I said, but does that now mean that we cannot determine a painter? Yeah, that there's a painter who painted Mona Lisa. And does science tell us that it was Leonardo da Vinci that painted Mona Lisa? Yeah, because all of this is outside the realms of science. And so the atheist actually said, he said, no, we could do DNA testing. Yeah, on Leonardo da Vinci. I said, where are you going to get his DNA from? Yeah, he goes, you're going to go to the grave. But how do you know that grave is Leonardo da Vinci's? It's through oral recitation. Yeah, it's through narrations. Yeah, it's not through science.
Testimony.
Yeah, exactly. Testimonial evidence. So the point being is you're not using science to determine this as truth. Yeah, even though you still believe that Mona Lisa was painted by Da Vinci. Yeah, or that a painting, even if you've not seen a painter painting that painting, you know straight away that that painting has a painter. Or when you look at a book, you know straight away that the book has an author. Yeah. So these are rational, even though they're outside of the technical aspects of what we call empiricism or the scientific methodology. So I give these types of examples, very simple, basic examples. They don't need to be, we don't need to use complex language or complex argumentations, very basic arguments, very basic examples, and that's sufficient. You know, in fact, Imam Ghazali, he discusses some of these examples as well. He in his book on Usul al-Fiqh, which is Al-Mustasfa, he talks about the empiricists of his day. Yeah, he says empiricists, they say the only method of determining truths is through experience, and he said no, we can determine truths based upon basically something called synthetic propositions, like 2000 plus 2000 equals 4000. Yeah, I don't need to see 2000 of something plus another 2000 of something in order to know it equals 4000. Yeah, or that 10 is less than 1,000. Yeah. So he gives this an example. He also said if a person's never been to Baghdad, he knows Baghdad exists through testimonial evidence, even though he's not experienced it. Yeah. So he actually, so you know, when I mentioned about this, classical scholars that we've got, they were talking about this, about science is not the only methodology to determine truths. Yeah. And in fact, he lays down 3 methodologies. He says through empiricism, through synthetic propositions, like, numbers and mathematics, and through testimonial evidence. These are the mechanisms by which we can determine truths and ideas.
Now, an atheist might come back and say, look, this is the best method that we have to study the world. And do you agree that this is the best method that we do have, science? And so we should only use science to try and come to an understanding of the world.
So it's a very deep question, believe it or not. Yeah, it's a really deep question. The reason why it's a deep question is because when people turn around and say science is the best way to study the world, it presupposes that science is, one, true, and secondly, is it presupposes that the world follows through a patterned, ordered process. Yeah. Otherwise, science doesn't work. My presuppositions about science and the scientific methodology will not work unless I assume patterns that operate within the universe. Yeah. There was a famous philosopher. His name was David Hume. and he looked at the issue of empiricism, and he was an empiricist. He was, he only believed in, empirical truths. But he said empirical truths cannot prove causal relationships. Yeah. So maybe to explain or through an example what he means by this. He's saying, look, if we wanted to determine the boiling, he didn't say this, but I'm giving this as an example that he would to understand what David Hume is saying. He said, if we were to look at the boiling point of water, and we wanted to say what is the boiling point of water? What temperature is it? And so we construct an experiment. We put a flame, a heat below a certain amount of water. We have a thermometer in the water, and we record the temperature. Yeah. Now, I know in America you use Fahrenheit. You don't use Celsius, do you?
Yeah.
Fahrenheit doesn't make any sense to me. So we say, obviously, you do the experiment and you notice that it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Yeah. So it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. So I say, okay, right, it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Excellent. So now we can say, and we might repeat it, yeah, just to make sure that it's not, a strange result. So we repeat it about 5 times. Then we will say, okay, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Now, what Hume said effectively is that that's built upon a number of assumptions. Yeah. The first assumption is our past experience can explain future observations. Yeah. So this is really important. We need to sort of think about this, that we boil the water, so we record it at 100 degrees Celsius. Then when we say water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, means that in future, it will follow that past event. And he says there's nothing to say that future events should follow past experience. That's an assumption. Yeah. Now, a lot of people find this really hard to appreciate and understand because we're so used to assuming these things that we think it's just intuitive and it's natural. And it is part of the rational method to assume and, understand causality. But from an empirical point of view, you're assuming that universe is ordered. It's got patterns. Future events follow from past experiences. That these are set. Yeah, these are going to occur whether you're in planet Earth or in another planet in another part of the universe. So long as the atmospheric pressure is the same, water will boil at the same temperature. Yeah. So long as the conditions and the variables remain the same, it will have the same boiling point. So anywhere in the universe, this is an assumption. The universe could be chaotic. Yeah. The universe could be completely random. Didn't have to follow any patterns whatsoever. Yeah. So you have to assume patterns and behavior. And obviously from our understanding of the Quran, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has imposed the laws within the universe. Yeah, these are our suppositions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within the universe, laws, set certain things, the sunnah of Allah, the wasila, the means by which we operate within this universe has been set and been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, we can now discover these patterns. Yeah. But that required information. When from a empirical point of view, you can't assume that. Yeah. I don't know if that's clear, because it is a deep question, and there are some deep points you have to really think about.
It's actually, you made it very simple.
Alhamdulillah.
The uniformity is an assumption. To think that there is a uniformity in the universe is an assumption that you have to first have in order to do science.
That's number one. And second is that future events will follow past experiences.
Yes.
The third one is that you have to have causality, that there will be a causal relationship. These are the assumptions that science has to assume. The methodology of science has to assume before you engage in science. Yeah. So this idea that science is the only way to truth and all these points that they raise, they don't realize that they're assuming certain premises already, assumption. And I had the debate a few years ago in London with a professor in philosophy, and he was a professor, and it was like 2 versus 2 debate. One was on. We had one debate. It was like 2 debates in one event. One debate was on belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the same debate, the other speaker from the Muslim was criticizing liberalism and secularism. Yeah, and so one of the atheists was arguing for the belief in Allah, and the other atheist was arguing for secularism. So we had to break for Salat al-Asr because there's Maghrib. I think it was Salat al-Maghrib because it was just the timings was the case. So as we were breaking, one of the atheist professors, he came to me, and he goes, "You're wrong." This is what he said. He goes, "You're wrong. Science does not assume causality." Yeah. He goes, "Where are you getting this from?" Yeah. And he goes, "I teach this at university." Yeah. So he goes, "I teach this at university." So I gave him an example, and it's a bit of a scientific example, but it was an example about the rotation of stars in nebulas, yeah, or in galaxies. So stars will orbit a central mass, normally what they call a black hole, supermassive black hole. Yeah. And what they found is that the orbiting of stars nearer to the black hole was orbiting at the same speed as those that were further out of the from the black hole. Now, from the law and the theory of gravity, yeah, that is impossible, because those that are on the further edges of the galaxy, if their orbit, their speed is the same as the ones closer to the central mass, which is causing the gravitational pull and therefore the orbit, they would be thrown out of the galaxy. Yeah. And so when they observed this is what I was explaining to them. I said, when they observed this, they didn't say we need to change the theory of gravity. They said there must be a cause for gravity here. Yeah. And then they came up with this idea, what's called dark matter. So this is where this concept of dark matter comes in, that most of the universe is made up of these dark matters, neutrinos, I think they call them, dark matter, which has gravity and therefore allows the preservation of the theory of gravity to exist as we know. So I said, look, they assumed from the observation, they assumed there must be a cause. They just don't know what the cause is. Yeah, because they're seeing an effect and there must be a cause. And it was like it was in between the actual debate. And so he went and he just went quiet and he goes, like that. He just sort of looked at me. So he didn't really know what to say regards to that, because, you know, and he's just really, and he's a professor in philosophy. He's a professor who said to me, he teaches, you know, the scientific method, you know, the philosophy of science.
Yeah. A lot of the argument for, I think, a lot of the argument for those who argue this kind of case, that science is the what leads us to truth, I think one of the things that they do use is the successes of the last 50 to 60 years. And they say that, look at all of the successes. We are going to the moon now. You're using cell phone to communicate with people all the way on the other side of the world. Science is successful because science works, therefore it must be true. What would you say about that?
Well, firstly, we don't deny science. You know what I mean? We're Muslims, so we accept it. The point being is that for science to work, we had to assume causality and patterns. Causality and patterns themselves do not arise from material objects. You know, it's a deep point, you know, maybe requires further elaboration, but you can never prove that patterns should exist within the universe, but patterns do exist. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the patterns are imposed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He created the patterns. He allows the birds to fly. He, allows the ships to float upon the ocean. He created the heavens and the earth with a particular order. Yeah. So we know that this is the case. Because we know this is the case, then we have a rationally consistent understanding of science. Whereas for those who just take science as a basis for all truths, they don't have an empirically sound and consistent basis to justify why patterns exist in the first place. Yeah, they're like a person who's got a hammer and he's using a hammer, but he doesn't know how the tool works. Yeah. Whereas what we've got is we've got the hammer and we know how the tool works. So we know that the tool works in the area of the universe because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has imposed a system, and science allows us to investigate that system. Yeah, and from that, discover how to utilize that system for the benefit. So, this idea that science has done fantastic things, and we've done this and we've done that. Yeah, fine, alhamdulillah, science has done, wonderful things, in terms of certain things, but it is still resting upon certain fundamental rational concepts, like principles of causality. And those concepts for us are actually established from the Quran as well. If rationally we can establish it, but also from the Quran, that the universe operates according to a system, and that system was imposed by the Creator, created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, including the universe as well. And therefore, it makes sense as a consistency in regards to this. And that's why, if you look in the past, many of the Muslim scholars of the past, they were scientists as well. So we have a great history in terms of science. But it is it seems a very slightly childish argument to me when somebody says, "Oh, this must be, this works, so therefore it's true." Yeah, therefore it's not just true, but it's the only truth. It's like, come on, let's look at it a bit deeper now.
Where do you think a lot of these atheists got the idea that Islam and other religions are backwards and science is progressive?
So a lot of atheists, particularly in the West, their experience with religion is Christianity. And obviously, if you look at the history of Christianity, there was always this natural antagonism between Christianity, religion, reason, and also science. The famous example of Galileo, how he was put under house arrest and forced to recant because he said that he, when he looked at his telescope, he was able to see the rings of Saturn and other objects. And they were like, no, this is going against doctrine and dogma. And so a lot of, atheism is a reaction to Christianity in particular. And because now what we're seeing is there's a lot of debate about Islam and Muslims in the media, particularly post 9/11. And a lot of this debate is fueled politically, and so this has resulted, we have to understand that the political reality has actually created the rise of atheism. Yeah, so, it's become a trend, and it's become it's become a way to make money and become popular and become famous by opposing Islam. Yeah, so Dawkins will write about the God delusion. At the beginning, he talks about, how do we convince people to go and send a plane into tall buildings? Yeah, I don't know if you've come across his book and read his introduction, but he mentioned that he's talking about 9/11. Or Christopher Hitchens talks about God is not great. Yeah, he writes a book about this. Or Sam Harris, he writes a book on the moral maze, and he talks about the moral landscape, sorry, and he talks about Islam as being the motherlode of bad ideas. Yeah, it's just they are being politically opportunistic. Yeah, they're following the agenda of the media and the politicians, which is to justify foreign policy abroad by demonizing Islam and the Muslims, and so they're just simply following that particular narrative. And in the 1990s, I remember before 9/11, when you come across an atheist, they're very respectful people. Yeah. They were people who would say, you know what, we have an argument, let me listen to your argument. They weren't what you come across the atheists today. Atheists today is like, I'm not an atheist, I'm an anti-theist. Yeah. This is how they come across. I don't just not believe in God. I hate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I hate God. This is how they come across. If you listen to Stephen Fry, who's a famous actor and comedian in the UK, he mentioned this point. Dr. Lawrence Krauss, who's a physicist, and he does debates against belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, even if God exists, I would not prostrate to God. This is what he said. He goes, even if God exists, I would not prostrate to God because I'm not an atheist, I'm an anti-theist. Yeah, and you sometimes, when we read about Iblis, Shaitan, Allah's curse be upon him, and you think, how is it that a person, Iblis, how could he know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and still remain a disbeliever?
No.
And then when you come across statements like that, you think, okay, that's why. Yeah, it's the arrogance, the pride regards to this. So you find that there was there's this popularization of being atheist. Atheism is like, for a lot of people, is seen as synonymous to being intelligent. You've got these intelligent people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, I want to be intelligent. Yeah. So therefore, they're atheists. I want to sound intelligent. So I'm going to be atheist too. Yeah. So it's just a trend at the moment. It's a fashion thing. And that's why it's so hard to discuss with them as well, because they've not really thought it through.
Ah, yeah, I do face this a lot. They assume that they have that position, the intellectual position already, and so everyone else is kind of lower than them,
Yeah.
and so they have that assumption to begin with, and so whenever you start the conversation, they're already in their mind looking down at you. But
Yeah.
you said something very interesting, and I want to actually follow up on this. Atheists claim higher moral standards to when it comes to religious people. This phenomena seems to have spurred from the war on terrorism, as we see many atheists using the evil actions of fringe groups to support their higher moral standards. First, can you speak to the moral issue regarding atheism and whether they have a stand? And second, can you speak to the idea of them claiming higher moral standards to religious people by using things like 9/11?
Yeah. So, this is what a lot of people, I'm talking about a lot of non-Muslims don't realize, is that they've already got ideas in their mind, and they've already born in a culture and an environment which develops certain received opinions, as we call them. Yeah, so these are opinions that you assume to be true. They're non-questioned. And the problem is that they don't realize that they are adopting certain beliefs, and based upon those beliefs, they're then viewing things from a moral outlook. Yeah. So those moral views, what is morally good, morally bad, is actually coming from a presupposition on a viewpoint on life, a set of beliefs. And they don't realize this. And so sometimes what you have to do is you have to get them to be aware that actually you're adopting a belief system, and from that belief system, you're adopting your moral views. So a lot of atheists, to be honest, atheists, etc., really their belief system is liberalism or liberal secularism, yeah, or some people of course say liberal secular capitalism. This is their belief system, that human beings have the right to decide what is morally good, morally bad, that human beings should be free to do whatever they want, irrespective of any belief in a higher power or not. This is the fundamental belief that exists. And they put certain other assumptions with regards to that human beings pursue what is in their self-interest, and that's the primary urge and drive for human beings to perform actions. And so, therefore, when they start to view what is morally good, morally bad, they're viewing it from this lens. And so, for example, a popular example that is used a lot is like homosexuality. So they will say, okay, we believe human beings are free. They should be able to do whatever they want and should be able to do what pleases them as an individual. That is what is moral. So as a result, if it's two consenting adults, irrespective whether it's heterosexuality in a marriage, outside of marriage, with another man, with another woman, with a whatever, yeah, then that is their freedom, their individualism, their pursuit of benefit. Therefore, it is their moral right. And so we have to start to break down whether we can determine whether these set of principles can be rationally established or not. If they can't be rationally established, then they're just simply a set of dogmas, a set of belief systems that they cannot be proven. So I think this is the first aspect of, getting them to identify their moral outlook. The second aspect, there's another few aspects, but the second aspect is, like I mentioned, and like you mentioned as well yourself, with regards to the post 9/11, what was occurring in that period of time was this desire to intervene in the Muslim world, whether that was Iraq or Afghanistan initially, then Iraq, and then later some of the other countries in the Muslim world. In their, in the viewpoint, the political viewpoint within the West, I'm talking about the politicians here, particularly like in America and also probably in the UK as well to a certain extent, they desired to reshape the Middle East based upon liberal secular foundations. They wanted to implement this philosophy within the Muslim world as a way to create what they call the end of history. Yeah, there's a famous political philosopher. His name was Francis Fukuyama, and he wrote a book called The End of History. And it was talking about in the 1990s that now Soviet Union has died. There's no longer Soviet Union. capitalism will reign supreme. And then he mentioned in that book, and prior to that, there was another political philosopher, Samuel Huntington, in his thesis called Clash of Civilization, where he talked about also that there is groups of people, and he's talking about the Muslims, who have not adopted this liberal secular capitalist culture. And so therefore it was a case of let's intervene in these countries as a way to try to impose a liberal secular outlook. And so in that, they had to create a narrative, and the narrative was that the Muslims are an existential threat to Western civilization, that they must be intervened in the Muslim lands. You need to impose a system upon them. If you don't do that, then they are going to come back and attack us in our own countries in the West, because they just hate freedoms, and they hate West so much. They hate the fact that we drink alcohol or whatever it is that they were saying. So this was their argument. And so what you have now is atheists just simply borrowing these arguments, adopting these arguments in order to just parrot this Western, what we would term imperialistic outlook, or interventionist outlook in the Muslim world, as a way to give an intellectual and moral justification for their foreign policy.
Jazakallah khair. You said something very interesting here, and we're starting to see a lot of the effects that was started back then, post 9/11, where their hope and their goal was to try and spread this ideology of liberalism and so forth. Many Muslims today are actually taking that, and it's becoming more prevalent in the Muslim societies. What is your advice to those who are in positions to help the Muslims understand this? And what is your advice to the layman Muslims in regards to this ideology?
So maybe it goes back to actually, I think, your second question about atheism, whether they've got morality as well. So in relation to this point, I think what Muslims have to do is they have to turn around and not buy into the propaganda against Islam and the Muslims. And the propaganda is this, that the Muslim world is so bad, and it's the reason why it's so bad. So there is a lot of poverty in some parts of the Muslim world. There's certain corruptions, etc. That the reason why it's so bad is because of Islam. That's what the West portrays. There's a famous historian. His name is Joseph Massad. He's a Christian Palestinian, or Palestinian Christian, and he wrote a really interesting book called Islam in Liberalism. And he talked about how even in the the 19th century, there was a colonialist trend to try to justify colonization of Muslim lands, like Palestine, like Jordan, Egypt, etc., by trying to present the Muslims as the barbarians and that they're a threat. And so Joseph Massad, he mentions this, how the same narrative is still being used today. Muslims are barbarians. They are, reason why they're backwards and despotic is because of Islam. Therefore, they need to be either subdued by the West or civilized by the West. And they call this civilization project of the West, they call it the white man's burden. This is what it was called in the colonial period. So it's not unsurprising why there's such systemic racism within the Western world, because this is the belief system that they were brought up on. And we still see it's mirroring today, which is about how they present this. And what we have to say is actually, the Muslim world does not represent Islam. Maybe in the past, certainly during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, we can say this is what represents Islam, and even later on, period. But in the recent times, many of the Muslim world are post-colonial constructs. So they're not countries that arose because of Islam per se. We're not we believe that the Muslims in the Muslim world, we're not making any strange pronouncements against the Muslims, alhamdulillah. They're Muslims, but the type of structures that we see today, they don't represent the type of structures that we see within the Quran and the Sunnah. And maybe an example of this is you've got a non-practicing Muslim. Now, you can't say and judge Islam by a non-practicing Muslim. If he doesn't represent the faith, you can't say, well, so that's the problem with Islam. What's he representing? So if this person is following Western culture, and he's getting messed up because of that, is stealing, is drinking alcohol, is womanizing, is taking drugs, then you're saying, hold on, he's a product of the West, or Western culture, capitalist culture, if you want to say, yeah? You'd have to look at it from that point of view. To a certain extent, you have to look at the Muslim world as well. The Muslim world is a product of the colonization that took place and then the post-colonization period, yeah? So how many Muslim countries have interest rate systems, rate banking systems within our countries? All of them. Yeah. Unfortunately, the sad reality, all our countries have that. So when we look at poverty and we look at the problem of, the fact that people, some parts of the Muslim world, got huge amounts of poverty, we can't say, well, it's because of Islam. If the Islamic economic system is not being implemented, then it's not because of Islam. If the implementation of the system is capitalist, interest-based system, then where's the problem? Interest-based system. Yeah, it's a very basic example. And so this is what I would explain to Muslims. I said, don't buy into the propaganda, which is justifying colonization or post-colonization or neo-colonialism. Yeah. Look at what Islam says. And then when you understand what Islam says, actually, we need to revive the ummah and build within the Muslims the correct way. And this point as well, sorry about this atheism as well and morality. Don't believe, again, this idea that atheists understand what morality is or have a higher moral framework of thinking. From an atheist point of view, who believes that the universe, the mind, human beings are just a product of blind, random, naturalistic chance. We came from nothing, by nothing, for no reason, through a blind, naturalistic process. Then human beings don't have the ability to choose, because our ability to choose is what our chemicals in our brains are doing, what they call neurotransmitters in our brains and firing action potentials within our neurons. Those things are physical processes. This is what they're saying. Those things are physical processes. And those physical processes are a result of just simply physical blind law. Laws which are non-conscious, non-living, random, that they are following a certain set of laws, and as a result causing you to make certain action potentials in your brain, which then causes you to choose certain things. So you're not really choosing anything. And in fact, even prominent atheists like Sam Harris recognizes the problem within how they view neuroscience from a materialistic point of view, that states that actually, can we prove that human beings have consciousness, are able to choose? And instead, actually, that's a very difficult proposition to push. And many atheists, many materialists, do not believe human beings actually have moral choices. If you don't have the ability to choose, then you don't have the ability to make moral choices. If you don't have the ability to make moral choices, then you can't argue whose morality is greater or lesser, because this person is acting in a way which is morally determined for them. And another person is acting another way because of his, physical makeup. Moral deterministic. Does that make sense, Yusuf? Sorry.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. But here, I can hear it in the background of my mind. An atheist would come and say, "Look, we can explain all of this. We can explain morals in the sense of evolution. Evolution, it led us to having morals because it was absolutely necessary for us to survive." What would your answer be?
But it's the same thing. It's the same thing, because if they're saying through naturalistic processes we get to the stage where human beings are predetermined to create the choice that they're performing, then you can't say that they have a choice, because it's predetermined choice, if that makes sense. Yes. Meaning that, if I've got a computer program and I say, when I press this, it does this. So the computer is not choosing. It's following, electromagnetic signals in the wires. That's all it's doing. Now, if human beings are just materialistic entities, meaning we just arose from the universe, and the universe arose randomly from nothing, by nothing, for no reason, then everything that we think we choose is not choice, it's predetermined. So where is the moral choice in that? In fact, every single action that we perform, according to materialists, every single action that we were going to perform occurred 13.78 billion years ago in the past, which was the Big Bang. As soon as there was the Big Bang and the laws of the universe, universal laws, were set, then everything was going to follow that predictive, deterministic pattern, including the evolution of human beings, if you want to use that word. Yeah, in terms of the fact that, we're going to sit here, watch this video, was predetermined 13.78 billion years ago. Yeah. So, again, like I said, how do you determine moral choices, and determine what is morally good, morally bad, or morally evil, when you believe that you don't have a choice? Yeah. So it's really, I think it's a very important point in terms of this perspective. And even thirdly, I should say, is even this point about where do they get their morality from? How do they determine that morality? Yeah. So if they, like you mentioned about evolution. So even if we say, okay, we have choices, say, okay, evolution. Okay, so we evolved to be altruistic, to help others. Yeah, this is what they'll argue. So,
Right.
okay, what if we were evolved to be, like the black widow spider, that after mating, the female spider eats the male spider. Yeah, is that now morally good? Yeah, does that make sense? So if you're going to now start to use these arguments about evolution justifies morality, then it just happens to be we evolved in this way as opposed to that way. Yeah. And then what happens when somebody turns around and says, well, actually, if the purpose of evolution and main goal of a species in an organism in the theory of evolution is to pass on its genes, then those organisms which are most successful in passing on its genes, i.e. reproducing, are the most successful ones. And therefore, potentially, you could argue the most moral ones, because they're achieving their purpose. So then what about Genghis Khan, who went around raping and pillaging? And they say 1/6 of the world's population today is related to Genghis Khan. Yeah. Okay, he must have been very, according to this evolutionary atheist perspective, he's a very successful human being, very moral. Na'udhu billah. Yeah. So, so you find that, you can, you can use a lot of these arguments. There's another classic argument that I use about evolution as well. About morality and atheism, because a lot of people argue about maximizing good for the most people and minimizing bad. Yeah.
Right.
So I give this argument. I say, look, you've got a healthy, mashallah, healthy looking brother. Yeah. Who's got a healthy heart, healthy kidney, healthy lungs, healthy liver. And you've got 4 or 5 sick people. One needs a heart, one needs a liver, one needs a kidney, one needs a pair of lungs. Would it now be morally right to kill that one individual to save 5 people? Because you're maximizing the benefit, for the majority of people. So when you start to present these arguments, then people start to think, especially atheists, is like, no, this is not what I mean. So, well, what do you mean? You can demonstrate the contradictions, the internal contradictions within these arguments for belief in, for assuming that they can know what morality is. Yeah. So there's loads of arguments, there's loads of examples that you can give in order to demonstrate this. And, brothers should start to think about, how do I argue that morality cannot be known from the mind solely? We need divine inspiration. We need a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell us what is good and what is bad. Yeah. So, you can show these examples, and we see these examples in our day-to-day living as well, if, just aware to what to look for.
SubhanAllah. Now, it's been an hour, and we can go on for at least another 3-4 hours.
Don't you guys have to do Jummah soon as well?
Exactly, yes. So, inshallah, I do have to get ready for that. And I know that you just got off work and you have to go get some rest. So as a parting advice, what would you advise our brothers who are listening, who are involved in the da'wah, in terms of giving da'wah, and which areas to really focus on in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, so I'm going to make this very quick because I don't want you to be late for your Jummah.
No, take your time. I'm good. I have about an hour.
Oh, right. Okay, alhamdulillah, that's not too bad. Our Jummahs here normally start at 1:30, so we have to be You're relatively quick. But
Exactly.
it's a very deep question. It's a very big question as well. I think the first thing I would say is this: your dawah that we do, inshallah, is more than just about giving dawah to individuals. Alhamdulillah, we want individuals to embrace Islam. But the da'wah of Islam, like the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was in Mecca, and created a civilization. Yeah, so it created, people embraced Islam. They established Islam in Medina. They created many thousands upon thousands of companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We had the Khulafa Rashidin. We had the spread of Islam, across North Africa all the way to Hind and China. And then we have these great Islamic sciences being developed on tafsir and fiqh and hadith and literature, and then you've got great other sciences like medicine and astronomy. You've got this new civilization that's being created. I think that's how our mentality should be. That's how our vision should be. Our vision should be about, most of the times we're just going to be interacting with individuals, but our vision has to be broad. We're here to create inshallah, establish this deen and demonstrate this deen to be the civilization that humanity wants to follow. Yeah. So this is really important to have that mentality in place. That dawah should be for this type of broad perspective upon life. Yeah. So we're not just trying to talk about proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence in isolation of talking about the wider issues. Yeah. This is part of it. So I think that's the first advice I would do. So I'd first say to the brothers and sisters involved in dawah, realize that our dawah is to create a civilization and a just nation and just ummah that becomes a leading ummah that the whole of mankind embraces. Yeah, and we know the prophecies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that said Islam will reach east and west. Yeah, and there will not even be a hut, whether it's made of wood or made of mud, that Islam will not have entered it. Yeah, either honoring its citizens or lowering the citizens or lowering those people. So we know the hadith says this about how Islam will spread and that it will become the shining example. And this is how our mentality has to be. The second aspect is don't approach every engagement with a person as a debate. Yeah, debates are a small aspect of our dawah. Approach a person through trying to understand that person's point of view, understand what are maybe the underlying ideas that he has, and try to probe them. And the best way when you engage in a discussion like this is get that person to make a self-realization. Yeah. So, we started off talking about how I engaged in debates at the beginning, about proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. But what I'm saying here is don't approach the discussions that you have with people where you're trying to debate them. Yeah. Try to understand what they're saying and try to get them to understand what you're saying as best as possible. And, have that I would, for a lot of brothers, I would recommend if you're doing dawah stalls, try your hardest to get their number to follow up outside of that environment. Yeah. To go and meet them in a coffee shop or in a takeaway. Yeah. Sit down, have a chat with them. Because in that environment, in a stall, it's a maybe slightly abnormal environment. When they can see you outside of that, it's more natural and they can open up. Yeah. And really, if you're able to do that, inshallah, you can become quite, productive because of that. The third aspect is that I've noticed not always the most knowledgeable brother is the best in da'wah. Yeah. Sometimes you get very knowledgeable brothers, and alhamdulillah, they're very good at da'wah. Sometimes you get very knowledgeable brothers and, they're very good at what they do. But you find they don't invite many people to Islam or they don't bring many people to Islam. And then you find that there are brothers who are not very knowledgeable, in terms of establishing Islam. But mashallah, man, the way they make da'wah is just like, they just speak, they're able to connect, engage with people, bring them. There's a brother on Facebook, if you ever get a chance to follow him, Abu Idris, and he always has these stories about his workplace and how he engages in da'wah, his workplace, yeah. And many of us, obviously, when we work with non-Muslims, we're a little bit shy to talk about Islam, and maybe it's not the right way. He's talking about everything. He talks about hudud. He talks about, Islamic civilization, khilafah. He talks about belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything. And you think, oh my God, is he going to get into trouble or what? But, mashallah, the way he's able to connect and the way he's able to bring people into Islam as well. He's brought many people, mashallah, into Islam as well. So the key aspect of this is to really understand the person that you're talking to and try to connect with them. And as best as possible, try to follow that connection up. So, don't think that, alhamdulillah, Yusuf, you're, mashallah, very experienced in this as well. But you probably know as well, most of the people that you engage with, the most productive ones is the ones that you can engage with after the dawah store, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. After they've met you from the dawah store, they've taken your number, and you meet them again. Then you can get some proper discussion, build that proper relationship. Yeah. And that's really the pursuit. So brothers should not think dawah is just like what we do once a week. Yeah. It has to be, especially if we've got this vision of building a civilization. Yeah. An Islamic society to reflect the society at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Khulafa Rashidin. If we have that vision, then we know that this dawah, like the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, particularly in the early period in Mecca, they were making dawah day and night, every single day. Yeah, it was a struggle. They were facing persecution and torture, and they were still making dawah, like Bilal radiallahu anh. Yeah. So, we shouldn't think, sometimes we live in the West and we get comfortable lives, and, dawah is like something we do in our spare time, and, we avoid confrontation. But we have to realize that the type of vision that we have, we're going to face inevitable struggles and difficulties like the prophets, peace and blessings be upon them, in the past, they faced. And so if we're going to tread on that path, then we're also going to face difficulties as well. Inshallah, we always pray for the best, but we prepare as well for the sabr and the patience that is required in order to focus on this da'wah as well.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us, give us the patience required to do this work in a way that is pleasing to Him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you tremendously for this very informative discussion. I hope that we get to do this a lot more. Before we end this, where can people find you, and how can they follow your work?
So the best place to follow me is probably Facebook. Sharif Abu Layth, I think my name's there at the bottom. So if you go on Facebook, even if I can't add you as a friend, you can always follow me on Facebook, and I post things up on there. So inshallah, you have the opportunity. But there are lots of other brothers. Inshallah, they should uplift our Facebook page, follow Yusuf as well, inshallah, on Facebook. There's lots of brothers, mashallah, to follow as well. So
this shows us how humble you are. Instead of talking about you, and which is what I wanted, you turned it around on us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and continue to keep you humble, and continue to keep all of us humble. Allahumma ameen. Any projects that you're working on that people should follow?
So there's a few things I'm doing. There's one thing that I'm trying to complete is a book on the rational proofs for Islam. So going through proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, all the way to showing that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah. So I'm in the process of doing that. I think maybe some people may know that I did a course as well called the Evidence Course. So if anybody gets an opportunity, I think you can check it on YouTube, or if, there's links as well somewhere. So if people want to contact me and want to request those links, I can send the links, are pre-recorded videos now, so they can have a look at that, inshallah, as well.
We will take some of those links if you can send it to me, and I'll add it on the link on the description of this video. I think there's a lot of stuff that you've done with Basira Project as well.
That's the Evidence Course with Basira Project, yeah.
Perfect, mashallah. So if anybody wants to see it, they can go there as well on Facebook. Do you have Twitter as well?
I do, but I rarely use it. Rarely use it. So yeah, they can follow me on Twitter, but I don't.
With the name as well?
Yeah, it's the same. But there's too many platforms. Instagram. I'm on Instagram as well, but I just can't use it as well. I just find it difficult.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. For all the brothers who are here and sisters, please do share this with other people so that they can benefit from the topic we discussed today and all of the things we had a conversation about. Please do share it. This is huge benefit to the ummah, and they might gain a thing or two from this, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. If you haven't already subscribed to our platforms, including YouTube, please do that, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. All of our platforms are at Uplift Dawah ORG, at Uplift Dawah ORG. So facebook.com/Uplift Dawah ORG. Same with YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Please do follow all of those platforms, inshallah. We will continue to bring this type of podcast to try and benefit the ummah, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us, to be pleased with what we did here today, and to guide us, continue to guide us, and allow us to benefit the ummah, and continue to do things that are pleasing to him, and protect us from that which garnishes his anger. Allahumma ameen. I thank you guys. Until the next time, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem, we will see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.